Okay, so today we're going to try to unpack something pretty huge, and that's the whole question of, like differences between men and women.
Right.
Obviously, not just in the, physical
Right.
sex, which is kind of obvious, but also psychologically speaking.
Right.
And how all that then plays into
Yeah.
gender roles in society and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot.
I think so.
We've got research articles, we've got like bigger analyses that look at a ton of different studies, and we've got stuff on how this plays out in different cultures, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
So our kind of goal here is to give you the rundown, like what are the core things we see
Exactly.
without, getting too lost in the weeds of all the, technical jargon and stuff.
It can get pretty dense.
Right.
Yeah.
So, ready to dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first off, the body, the physical stuff.
Okay.
Genetics 101. You've got X chromosomes for women, XY
Right.
for men.
Right.
And then you've got the hormones, the big ones, testosterone mostly in men, and then, estrogen and progesterone in women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about, making babies. These hormones do a lot more, don't they?
No, absolutely. I mean, they kind of get their hands in everything, like how your muscles develop, how strong your bones are. I mean, we see men on average having denser bones and more muscle mass.
Right.
Oh, and they're taller too, like on average about 7% taller.
And even the brain is wired differently, right?
To some extent, yeah. Research from places like Stanford and the PMC has really delved into this.
PMC, just so people know, that's like a huge online library of medical research.
That's exactly.
So we know, like, male brains are a bit bigger on average.
They're about 10% or so.
Which Northwestern medicine has pointed out doesn't actually mean they're smarter. It just
means they're bigger.
Just means they're bigger.
Right, right.
But we also see maybe some differences in the structure, like the hippocampus might be a tad bigger in women and the amygdala in men.
Right.
And even like how the different parts of the brain connect up might be different.
That's what some studies in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, suggest.
Whoa, PNAS.
Yeah.
Super legit.
Right.
But then there's also this whole thing about brain plasticity, right?
Yeah.
Like our brains can actually change and adapt based on what we do and experience, which The Guardian has talked about a lot.
Which really throws a wrench in that whole biology is destiny thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to the psychological differences.
Okay.
So there are these giant studies called meta-analyses, which basically take a bunch of smaller studies and kind of mush them all together to see the bigger picture.
Right.
And they've found some average trends, but like you said, there's tons of overlap between men and women.
Yeah, it's not like night and day.
Right. Like maybe on average, men might be a bit more assertive.
While women are more nurturing.
That kind of thing. And this is based on stuff from PubMed and others.
Yeah.
And then in terms of thinking and stuff, there are some small average differences. Maybe men with spatial stuff, women with language.
Psychology Today has some good articles on that.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, the differences within each gender are way bigger than the average difference between men and women.
Exactly.
And the same goes for things like how we read emotions. PMC has done research on
It's
that.
fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, and we can't forget the hormones.
Right.
Testosterone's been linked to competition and risk-taking, estrogen to memory and mood.
Yeah.
All this from PMC, too.
And what's really wild is that our behavior can actually change our hormone levels. PNAS research has shown that.
It's like a two-way street.
Totally.
So then, this whole question of nature versus nurture,
Oh, yeah.
evolutionary psychology, is all about, how we evolved to be different based on our roles way back when. And there's some interesting stuff in Frontiers about that. Then you got genetics, like straight-up DNA differences, which Wiley has published research on.
Right.
And even the hormones we're exposed to in the womb, which can have lasting effects. Science Direct has a bunch on that.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is. But then there's the nurture side, right? How we're raised, which the UNGP talks about.
Right.
Cultural expectations, which Social Sci-Libertext does a good job explaining. And all the structures in society that kind of push us in certain directions, like gender expectations in the workplace. There's some great work from the Gender Sci Lab on that.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
So the way people are thinking about it now is that it's not either or, it's this constant back and forth.
Exactly. It's not nature versus nurture, it's nature and nurture.
Right. Like the biopsychosocial model, this idea that our biology, our psychology, and our social world are all tangled up together.
Right. And this concept of neuroplasticity shows that our brains are constantly changing and adapting to all of that.
And even how our biology shapes society and how society shapes our biology.
That's what biosocial construction is all about. And Science Direct has some cool stuff on that.
It's a lot, right? And even Public opinion is all over the place. Pew Research has done some polls showing that people are pretty divided on how much is nature versus nurture.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure.
And then you look at different cultures, and it gets even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like Margaret Mead, her work showed that gender roles can be totally different depending on where you are in the world. You can find summaries of her research on Quizlet.
It really blows your mind, doesn't it?
It does. And PBS has done documentaries on cultures with reverse gender roles, or even more than two genders.
It really challenges our assumptions about what's natural.
It totally does. And then you look at how economic systems have played a role. Like in hunter-gatherer societies, gender roles were more fluid, which Fievel talks about.
And as society shifted to agriculture, things became more rigid. There's some research in PNAS on that.
And industrialization brought its own changes, as discussed by Oxford Academic. Then there's this fascinating thing called the gender equality paradox.
Oh, yeah.
Big think. The BBC and PNAS have all covered this. It's this finding that in countries where men and women are more equal, you sometimes see bigger differences in what careers they choose.
Which seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
It does. But maybe it's because they have more freedom to follow their own inclinations, whatever those might be.
Or maybe it's because, even in more equal societies, there are still subtle stereotypes that influence our choices. PubMed has some research on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the big question, are we basically made for certain roles based on our gender? I mean, biologically speaking, the only truly sex-specific role is having babies, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, men tend to be physically stronger on average, but in modern life, that doesn't matter as much as it used to.
Science Direct has pointed that out.
And then when it comes to, like social roles, most of that stuff is totally made up.
Right. It's all about what society decides.
Exactly. Social constructionism is the theory behind that. And you can find a good overview in Britannica.
So, like, what it means to be a man or a woman changes depending on where and when you live.
Exactly. And from a purely capability standpoint, men and women can develop skills in pretty much any area. The APA, the American Psychological Association, has emphasized that.
So it's not that, like, men are good at this and women are good at that. There's so much variation within each gender. It's crazy. Right. And putting people in boxes based on their gender just limits everyone's potential.
Totally. So what we're left with is this incredibly complex picture, right? It's this constant interaction between our biology and our environment on so many levels.
It's a dance, really.
Yeah, and our biology might, give us certain nudges in certain directions.
But it definitely doesn't determine who we are or what we can achieve.
Exactly. Social factors play a huge role in how those tendencies actually play out.
And that's where things get really interesting, because it means we have the power to shape those social factors.
Right, which leads to a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
How can we use this knowledge, this understanding that nature and nurture are always intertwined, to build a society that respects individual differences without limiting people based on their gender? Something to think about, right?
It is. It's about recognizing those potential biological influences, but not letting them dictate our choices or our expectations for others.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Well, thanks for diving deep with us today.
My pleasure. Always a great conversation.
Until next time.
See ya.